Hi, this is Dr. Nicole Credimenos. Welcome to my podcast for Sound Mind Counseling. This is the second episode of the podcast, and it is on imposter syndrome. Do you feel like a fraud? If you enjoy this podcast and feel that it is beneficial to you, please feel free to follow Sound Mind Counseling in order to come across all the new podcasts that I post. And also, please feel free to review in order for people to be able to see whether it's helpful and in what ways. I would also encourage you to message me on Facebook if you would like. My page is Sound Mind Counseling, and give me ideas of new podcasts that you would like for me to post. I decided to talk about imposter syndrome today because I have come across a lot of clients that have talked about suffering from potential imposter syndrome. But what is imposter syndrome? Understanding what it is helps us identify how we can correct the thinking behind it. People that struggle with imposter syndrome do believe that they don't deserve any accolades for their accomplishments. And even if they believe normally that they are competent, intelligent people, they do feel that soon enough others will discover the truth about them, that deep down they are not as competent as they believed they were. Around 25 to 30% of high-achieving people might suffer from imposter syndrome, and around 70% of adults could experience it at least one time in their life based on research. But what triggers imposter syndrome? Why do we experience it? Well, there are a lot of reasons. Calling attention to our successes can sometimes begin unleashing feelings of being an imposter. So, for example, receiving an award, passing an exam, or getting some sort of promotion at work. Now, if there is a failure that occurs after a lot of successes, that could begin causing the person to criticize themselves and question their overall ability. Now, imposter syndrome really begins due to many reasons. A lot of people believe that it is just self-esteem related. And although self-esteem definitely plays a role, there are a lot of types of imposter syndrome that I would like to talk about. The first type is perfectionism. The perfectionist that suffers from imposter syndrome really believes that unless they are absolutely perfect, they are not as good as other people might think they are. Now, have you ever tried to be perfect? Because I can tell you, when it comes to humans, the word perfect just does not relate. We are all a work in progress, and none of us are perfect at everything we do. But having that need for perfectionism often causes imposter syndrome. Next, we have the expert. The expert is a person that feels like an imposter because they expect to know everything about a particular subject or topic. And unless they know every single thing about it, they feel that they are an imposter. They want to reach that level of expertise that perhaps they haven't reached at that point or may never reach. Next, we have the natural genius. Now, with the imposter syndrome, the natural genius may feel like a fraud just because they feel as though they don't naturally have a talent or ability to do something specific. So, for example, let's say somebody is wanting to dabble into becoming an artist. So they might take an art class, begin drawing, painting, doing anything creative that would kind of help them achieve the goal. And let's just say that naturally they feel that they don't have that creative side, right? That they really do need the classes and the guidance in order to become good in that area. That would be an imposter syndrome type named the natural genius because they don't believe they naturally have that skill. Next, we have the soloist. The soloist is a person that does not believe in asking for help in order to achieve a goal or a task. So if the person has to ask for help, They feel as though they are an imposter because they cannot do anything on their own. And since they can't do things on their own, they question their own competence or ability. Last but not least, we have the super person. Wow, if only we could all be superhuman, how great would that be, right? Well, this type of imposter syndrome is when you believe that you must be the hardest worker, the hardest student, toughest student, the smartest student, the hardest worker in class, at work, with your friends when it comes to achieving things in the group. You want to reach the highest level of achievement possible, and if you do not achieve the highest level, then you are a fraud. So a person experiencing this type of imposter syndrome could be somebody, for example, that works for a company, right? And there are various positions and levels in this company, and they believe that unless they achieve the highest level and receive the highest position possible in that company, they are an imposter because they are not good enough. Now, as you can imagine, just listening to what I've talked about so far, it is obvious to see that having experiences that revolve around imposter syndrome really can kill somebody's self-esteem and sense of self-worth. We want to watch out for some common characteristics of imposter syndrome as well. So, for example, feeling as though you are wanting to assess your competence and skills, but not being able to realistically do it, maybe because of irrational thinking, such as perfectionism or perfectionistic expectations. Also, being successful in certain areas of your life and feeling as though your success is due to external factors. So, for example, let's say you're a student and you make a 98 on the final exam. Now, you know deep down you studied hard for this exam. You know you're intelligent. You know you've been working hard in this class. However, when somebody comes to you and praises you for that 98, for example, your professor or a classmate, you might think to yourself, well, the only reason I got a 98 was because X, Y, and Z reasons. So you might say because the test was easier than normal, because the professor was being lenient in grading it, or perhaps out of luck, right? How many times do we say, oh, we just got lucky, right? I just got lucky. I got an easy professor. I just got lucky with the final being easy. But in reality, deep down, it's because of your hard work or your intelligence or the amount you studied. Also, putting yourself down. That is a common characteristic of imposter syndrome. So telling yourself, come on, you could have done better than that, right? You made a 90 on that exam, but you and I both know that if you had studied harder, you would have made a 98, or you could have made a perfect score, 100. Now, this is self-talk that you're engaging in. You're telling yourself these things to put yourself down. Also, a common characteristic is fear that you will not live up to expectations. Now, whose expectations are these? Sometimes they are your expectations. Sometimes they are family members' expectations, teachers, bosses at work, managers, friends, partners, children, so on and so forth. Fearing that no matter what you do, you will never be good enough because you will never live up to what that person expects you to accomplish. Well, I can tell you that's a tall order, because if we live that way, chances are none of us will live up to some people's expectations, especially if they are unreasonable. So a trick here would be to realize, what are your expectations of yourself and how realistic are they? Being an overachiever. What do we mean by overachieving? Well, there's lots of concepts that revolve around overachievement, but essentially, it's when people judge their own worth based on their successes, and therefore, they tend to want to consistently achieve more and more and more. Why? Because their own sense of self and identity stems from their achievements. So instead of looking at yourself as an individual in terms of your personality, your character, your moral compass, you might base it on what you've accomplished, the grades, the money in the bank account, the title behind your name. Next, we have the tendency to sabotage yourself. Sabotaging your own success could be a sign of somebody suffering from imposter syndrome. Now, what is self-sabotage? Essentially, it is doing things that undermine your potential success in order to avoid either facing the truth or accepting things that you need to work on regarding your character, your personality, your behavior. Sometimes you mean to do this, sometimes you don't notice you're doing it. So for example, procrastination. Procrastination is a way of self-sabotaging. You might have a big test to study for, and you know that the test is tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., but instead of studying for the whole week prior, you skip studying all week and you stay up late the night before your exam and study hard, but don't get enough sleep, don't eat well, and therefore, in a way, you've sabotaged your potential success on that exam because of lack of sleep, lack of proper nutrition, and therefore potentially not being able to concentrate well on the exam to do well. So as you can see, procrastination could be a form of self-sabotage. Self-doubt is another sign of imposter syndrome. So yes, do we all doubt ourselves at times, or at least most of us? I shouldn't say all. Of course we do. Sometimes we're a little unsure as to whether or not we're able to accomplish a task, especially if it's something we haven't done before, right? So I'm getting ready to run a mile, but I've never run a mile. Then it would be normal for me to say, well, I wonder if I'm going to be able to run the mile without pausing. Well, that would be a healthy level of self-doubt. However, when self-doubt becomes crippling, or if it stems from an irrational thought, then that could be a sign that we're suffering from imposter syndrome. For example, if I'm used to running 5Ks, and running a mile is something I've done many times before with no issues, and I don't have any kind of physical issues at the time that might impede me from accomplishing that goal, then if I doubt whether or not I can run a mile, does that make sense? Or am I doubting myself for unreasonable reasons, irrational reasons? Last but not least, we have setting goals that are over the top, in a way self-sabotaging ourselves by making them high-achieving goals that perhaps we can't accomplish, and then feeling disappointed when we fall short of accomplishing those goals. So, of course, if I'm going to set a goal for myself that is unrealistic, then chances are I'm not going to be able to accomplish that goal. So by setting that over-the-top goal, I'm actually, again, self-sabotaging and then feeling disappointed when I don't accomplish the goal, even though the goal was unreasonable to begin with. So if I expect, for example, to make 100 on every assignment in school, or get a promotion at work in the first month that I got the job. Yes, is the promotion a good goal? Of course. Is making a perfect score on a test a good goal in school? Of course. But it is unreasonable in the manner in which I'm expecting it, and the frequency and the intensity. So we have to monitor, if we may, how we set those goals, why we're setting them, and if perhaps we're setting goals that we may never be able to accomplish. Okay, so now you have a little bit about the history of what is imposter syndrome and what are some characteristics that may indicate that we might be suffering from imposter syndrome. So last, I would like to talk about the impact of having such an experience. So what does it do to us when we are suffering from imposter syndrome? Well, for some, it can motivate them to achieve, right? So in order for them to stop feeling the way they feel, they want to experience high goals, be able to accomplish high goals, and therefore become motivated to achieve. However, in order to accomplish those goals, which are often unreasonable, they will likely experience a lot of anxiety in that process. So, in other words, let's say we're talking about working out at the gym, and we have a goal of losing an X amount of pounds or gaining an X amount of muscle or having a specific type of body. And we might say to ourselves, okay, in order to achieve this goal, I'm going to work harder and harder and harder. I'm going to go to the gym every day. I'm going to work out for at least an hour and a half, and I'm going to work out by lifting the heaviest weights possible, the most amount of frequency possible. But what we're doing is trying to make sure that nobody finds out that we're a fraud. In other words, if I don't accomplish that goal, what are people going to say? Are people going to think that I'm not motivated, that I'm not a high achiever, that I can't accomplish a goal that I set in mind? So that constant anxiety worsens and worsens and worsens, and sometimes, most often than not, could lead to feeling depressed. So if you're stuck in this vicious cycle, you might be noticing high anxiety in certain situations and even depression if it lasts long enough and depending on the intensity of it. So the issue with imposter syndrome is that you may be noticing that you're doing well because of it, because you keep on pushing yourself to work harder and harder to accomplish a goal. But at the same time, what you're not doing is working on your thinking behind it. So in other words, you still more than likely will feel like a fraud because your motivation is regarding success. And what makes you feel intelligent, competent, smart, able, capable is having those outside experiences and achievements and awards and accolades. And in the meantime, you're not really working on your thinking. You're not internalizing the experiences of success because you can't, because your measurement of who you are is based on those accomplishments. Now, anxiety can be at various levels, and it could turn into social anxiety for many people. So we want to definitely make sure that we are monitoring our thinking behind what's happening. So we want to monitor the signs of imposter syndrome, and we want to monitor the symptoms of it, in other words, the outcome. Now, what causes imposter syndrome? Many things can cause imposter syndrome. Research does suggest that growing up in a family in which there is a lot of controlling or overprotective behavior that may contribute to development of imposter syndrome in children. So, for example, if you grew up with parents that valued high achievement, that pushed you to get awards or, win prizes and so on, that could lead to you feeling that internal need to focus on accomplishments and successes as part of who you are and in terms of your self-worth and self-esteem. Now, other things that could contribute is personality characteristics. So, in other words, how much do you believe in your ability to succeed? That has to do with self-efficacy, which I will talk about in a future podcast. Also, the tendency to be a perfectionist, that could contribute as well, as I spoke about earlier. And of course, neurotic behavior. So that's part of the big 5 personality dimensions that are linked to high levels of anxiety, insecurity, tension, and guilt. Now, how do we cope with this? Well, first thing you could do is definitely get therapeutic help in order to work on your thinking and sharing your feelings as well. Irrational beliefs tend to lead to imposter syndrome. So really attacking your belief system and the way you perceive yourself and your abilities in terms of your successes would be a part of it. Focusing on others, in order to really combat having imposter syndrome, we do want to work on practicing our own skills and building our own confidence based on our abilities and not comparing ourselves to other people. Question your thoughts a little bit. Are they rational? Do you have evidence for what you're thinking about? And does it serve you to continue thinking in that way? Social media can also hurt us in this manner. overusing social media, especially in today's world where there are a lot of filters, a lot of social media being used to glorify ourselves and maybe make people see something that perhaps is not really even there, could really worsen our tendency to compare ourselves to other people and therefore question our own personal abilities. So, in summary, if you feel at times that you are a fraud, if you question your own ability, your own intelligence, your own capabilities in certain areas, even though you know deep down that you are smart, you are capable, you are good at what you do, I'd like for you to listen to this podcast a couple of times and see if you notice any of the symptoms that I talked about. And if you do, begin working on your thinking. Attack where this is coming from. Is it perfectionistic thinking that's the cause of it? Is it comparison to other people? Is it wanting to reach other people's unreasonable expectations? Or is it just your own tendency to view yourself based on your accomplishments and judge yourself based on that? Well, this was it for me today. If you want any more information regarding this topic, please feel free to contact me. Send me a message on the topics that you would want me to further talk about. I know even in today's podcast, I did talk about a few other things that could potentially be good podcasts that might help you guys in the future. So feel free to private message me. Again, follow this podcast. Please feel free to review it. And you could also check out my website at www.soundmindcounselingnk.com. You can find me on Facebook at Sound Mind Counseling, as well as Instagram at Sound Mind Counseling NK. Thank you, and I hope you have a blessed day.